Welcome back to the Wealth Actually podcast. I'm Frazer Rice. Estate planning is becoming a bigger and bigger part of the wealth management ecosystem, and advisors are becoming much more integrated into that process. We're going to talk a little bit today about the integration of technology into that discussion. David Barnard is the founder and CEO of Luminary, and we're going to go into it a little bit with him as to what he's building and how it helps everybody within the wealth management process. David, welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me, Frazer.
As we were talking about ahead of time, wealth management discussion really requires estate planning and helping families think about what life looks like after they're gone and what it takes to protect heirs, get them involved, otherwise deal with assets. Where do you come from in this discussion? Maybe talk a little bit about what you saw in your background and why it's important to have that discussion in the wealth management context.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting time to be having this conversation. There are a number of cross currents occurring within wealth management where, as you point out, what's always been an important conversation, especially among advisors to complex clients, is becoming even more important in the context of how the historical wealth management deliverable around investment services has become commoditized, or at least is less differentiated, used to be to a great extent. There's a lot of consolidation going on in the wealth management industry today in terms of who's advising, as firms are buying other firms, and a number of the current generation of wealth advisors are opting out. And then, of course, there's the folks who will be advised among the next generation of wealth owners and different expectations. So the idea behind Luminary, which I'll just say is a company that I started in 2021 after almost 25 years in investment research and wealth management, sort of came to be as a product of the front row seat that I had to a number of those changes that are taking place, and how, where in my own practice, I observed our very best wealth advisors leading their client engagement around legacy planning, the intersection of financial assets, deeply personal legacy goals, at a point at which there is tremendous tax alpha or value creation associated with structuring that historically has been delivered with painstaking effort and enormous inefficiencies because of the lack of purpose-built technology. And so as I, sort of looked ahead to see where I thought the industry was going and where there were needs for technology to really support advisors at scale, the idea behind Luminary became rather obvious. And I had a great opportunity to start the company in 2021 with some both advisory and financial backing from the venture capital community, as well as among strategic investors. And here we are today. We're super excited about what we're doing. But as I said, really the time and the environment in which we're doing it.
So one of the interesting things is sort of determining who the quarterback of the planning is. And I think the conventional wisdom back in time was that if you were dealing with estate planning, you have the estate planning lawyer. If you're dealing with tax, you have the accountant. If you're dealing with investments, you're dealing with the wealth advisor on that front. And these lines are getting more blurred as time goes on. And at the same time, the leadership of, let's call it the advising ecosystem, can change depending on the client. How did you see that in terms of building Luminary and the technology component that you've got?
It really sort of cuts to the core of how we built Luminary as a data and collaboration platform. So I'll take those in turn, and the latter first. So as you point out, the delivery of trust and estate services really is a team sport requiring expertise from the legal, tax, and investment communities at a minimum. And there's often, third-party fiduciaries and others involved. And so for a tool like ours to be maximally effective, it really needs to function as a source of truth where, in service of a shared client, a carefully curated network of advisors with specific expertise can coalesce and collaborate around data that in my experience, the wealth advisor is most naturally suited to lead, but needs to have folks that come in and provide tax and legal advice, which very few wealth advisors, can or want to take on in their own right. So Luminary was built as a collaboration platform where those third parties can be permissioned in, as I said, in service of a shared client, really, forming what is the epitome of a family office service experience, where a lot of the navigation and friction associated with managing those experts that would often fall on a client can be solved, at least as it relates to trust and legacy planning. The data piece is another problem we solve for. And obviously, most of the information related to what Luminary powers lives at first in an original document. And so, another wonderful timing aspect of what we're doing has been prompted by AI, where the migration of information from analog places and original documents into a properly structured data platform like Luminary, where that information can be organized, shared, as I mentioned before, but also connected directly to applications that allow the user to do modeling, visualizations, and reporting all in one streamlined workflow in a way that today is usually jumping from Excel and PowerPoint and various other applications that are neither purpose built for trust and estate services, nor are they connected. So Luminary solves for that, and how we also fit into the rest of the tech stack, feeding into things like portfolio reporting tools. That's really how it kind of comes together.
One of the challenges that I have in dealing with clients is, on one side, I have to dust off the law degree and understand what the document says and what the structures do and don't do. On the other hand, I also have to understand their tax ramifications. And then hopefully I have a good source of data as to what things are worth. So I am able to calculate what's happening and understand what the tax ramifications are, et cetera. The concept of having that single source of truth is very appealing to me, not just from a keeping things updated perspective, but also from a really just understanding that there's some history and a central source of information as much as the self-updating component.
Yeah, absolutely. And what that allows and enables is for ongoing conversations, where, today, where trust and estate work is being delivered by the industry, it's very much on a one-off sort of project or consultative basis, which makes it very difficult to come back and actually revisit planning ideas that have been presented in the past and ideally have been implemented and have had some success in terms of transferring, say, value outside of an estate. One of the things that Luminary unlocks is the ability for that value creation to be quantified and delivered as a reportable metric. And so in a world where, as I mentioned earlier, investment outcomes are increasingly sort of undifferentiated as a wealth management service area, putting this together with that really creates both, a lot more tangible value that an end client can recognize as a return on the fee dollar they're paying, but also, creates a point at which you're really engaging the client more personally, more deeply, cutting across generations, back again to one of those other mega trends that I mentioned earlier, that has all of the benefits that the industry looks for in terms of retention and referrals and just, general stickiness, that where done well, wealth management is as good a business as is out there. But this aspect of it, which holds so much promise, heretofore has just been so difficult to deliver because of all of the manual, analog, sort of lack of purpose-built tools for it. And again, that was the big idea behind Luminary, where I was able to see how effective that was in my former life, leading a big RIA, and how the very best advisors were really able to make that a huge differentiator for business development, and then ultimately in building books of business of happy customers who were referring new clients in themselves, but realizing that ultimately the delivery of that was limited by, in some cases, skill set, and in other cases, tooling. And we've set out to address both of those problems for the industry and what we often call the next generation of advisor services.
One of the things that I think is a big problem for a lot of clients and wealth managers generally is that with a lot of heavy lifting, they can sort of take a snapshot of what's happening at the moment. Maybe they're able to create a snapshot with a lot of assumptions attached to it in 40 years and sort of project out of that, in which case 70,000 different things happen that blow up that projection 2 days after it's been presented. But one of the things that I think like about the concept that you have is that by creating a report that shows where things are going, what dials you're turning, what knobs you're twisting in order to achieve a certain outcome, that you're taking a lot of what's in here from the client and putting it down into a report so that you have something that the client can understand 6 or 8 weeks after the ink's dry on, estate planning documents and things like that. But that can also be a central report that the rest of the family or the rest of the constituencies or the trustees can understand. Was that part of your thinking in trying to design this?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at technology in almost any industry that solves a workflow problem like you just described, what it's often described in tech terms is a system of record, which in plain English, again, digitizes information that often lives in analog places and at a minimum is not put in any kind of organized place, and then connects that information to a data foundation and applications that allow you to work in a much more efficient way in terms of the what if modeling, in the scenario analysis, which probably the only guarantee you're ever able to make to a client is whatever you're presenting to them at a moment in time that's forward looking is definitely going to be wrong. So your ability to go back and iterate and take both time and events and feedback on that creates just an enormous amount of inefficiency. Again, over time, things change. And the ability to go back and jump into a data platform that's already built out saves so much work in terms of, kind of revisiting anything or updating something, as should naturally be the case. So there's just tons of efficiency that comes from these ideas of a system of record. But I think what you're also getting at is this notion of impact and the way that you're able to engage clients. And let's face it, anytime you're talking about tax, it gets pretty wonky pretty fast. The ability to have rich visualizations and kind of plain English and understanding help clients understand both the what and the why they're doing something, not just kind of the details on the how, where you often, lose them. And so, the effect of that is you create more urgency for people to understand something and therefore act in their best interest. I mean, you know better than I do how many times a plan goes unimplemented because the client doesn't really get it. And, enormous value is lost associated with that. And so, if your technology makes you more efficient, but also makes you more impactful in how our customers are engaging their clients, that's a huge win. But, I think the idea of also unlocking new capabilities like this reporting out on tax alpha and making the value associated with transferred wealth tangible, not just in beneficiary terms, but also in really hard dollar terms, is what a system of record like Luminary unlocks by making the analog digital and attaching that data to applications that are really purpose-built for the task.
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting about it too is that in my world, where storytelling in many ways is the way to reach people and to sort of address fears or create a scenario where opportunities can be attained and things like that, the reporting, the math behind what's happening, that's sort of a necessary component of telling the story, but the putting it together, the updating it, etc. I find a lot of advisors end up, in order to prove the worth of the report that they've put together, that they and to justify the hard work they did in putting it together, they end up really burying their heads into the report in terms of sort of conveying that information, and they never quite graduate to that storytelling level that inevitably proves the point, which is then backed up by the math. And I think that's where, what you put together in terms of the visualization, the ability to summarize documents and get to the point where the document is there and useful, it then becomes something you use as opposed to something you prove, in a sense, in front of the client.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of what you described, I think we do really well from an efficiency perspective in our data models and things that are sort of well below the surface. But if you think about probably the highest impact single output that comes out of Luminary, it's literally a horizontal bar chart that has 3 sections. And what it does is displays the distributions to family, philanthropy, and tax liability on a second death. And so what Luminary does that sits behind that is digitizes the entire estate plan, enables the user, the wealth advisor, or the attorney or tax advisor who are also clients of ours, to set that planning in motion and say not just what would happen if your estate was put into action today, but what would happen on time and return based assumptions you can literally iterate on as well as we're talking right now. And for the size and the proportions of that bar to be something that you're able to sit with a client and say, how do you feel about this? Both in terms of the area represented by family, philanthropy, and tax, but also the dollar amounts. And to the degree any of those are unacceptable, different people are going to have different points of view on the family and philanthropy part. One thing most people agree on is they'd rather not pay more in tax than they have to. Luminary then allows the wealth advisor to iterate on ideas and what could change those outcomes, because estate planning, very much aligns with that old adage on, the best time to plant a tree, right? The best time is always 20 years ago. Second best time is today. And so, to help illustrate that in as simple a way as I just described can be really motivating for people to get behind doing something at a time when the value is potentially greatest, which is today. And, leaving all of the data modeling and the calculations there for backup and audit purposes. But to your point, not leading with that, because you're going to lose, the end client, before you even get started, if that's the case.
One of the things that I think is interesting about Luminary is the concept that in many ways, the modeling doesn't have to be limited to the CFP or the wealth advisor. The law firm or the accounting firm can be integral into the advice component, and that in many ways as a sandbox in order for everybody to work together and come up with the right thing for the client. It doesn't necessarily have to be exclusionary to any of the other disciplines that are important in the process.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. If you look historically, a lot of law firms have partnered with wealth advisors in service of the shared client, where they do all the documents and ultimately give the legal advice, but the wealth advisory firm, kind of runs all the numbers and brings those concepts to life. There's a lot of value in having those shared relationships. And, as I said before, Luminary is not in the business of providing legal or tax advice. We don't do anything in terms of document creation or interpretation. We are purely software where we are enabling our customers who do that, in some cases in service of a shared client, to do it in a collaborative way. But as you know, there are a number of professional services for practices in both legal and in tax fields where there isn't a wealth advisor in the picture that's either leading the conversation or is equipped to do all of that. And some of that work does fall back on the tax or legal expert. And in some cases, they're not really equipped to do it. And so some of the folks in those business areas who have been early adopters of Luminary have recognized a way they can be of greater service to clients they have where they are, really the lead in the conversation. So, I do think that over time, you'll see more firms leaning into these so-called family office service areas as adjacent to whatever their core product is, whether it's investing, law, or tax, as ways of deepening relationships, creating new revenue models, and, ultimately serving their clients better. But, both because of my bias coming from the wealth management industry, and I think that, from a client perspective, given that the wealth advisor has the longitudinal relationship, they've got the 360 view into the assets, they're more naturally suited to lead these conversations. But they certainly can't do it on their own. And again, that was one of the big architectural decisions we made from day one in Luminary, is to recognize that kind of team sport aspect of it.
As the team sport aspect becomes more and more sort of integrated into the wealth management world, and there's dozens of business models, whether it's brokerage and account level fee and transactions, et cetera. But as these things coalesce a little bit more, what does the world look like in 5 and 10 years? And how does Luminary help drive that?
I think we all know in 2 years, the world is going to look a little bit different, barring unforeseen legislation around tax that will make the number of individuals and households that are subject to estate tax, by some measures, 5 or 10 times greater than is the case today. Now, of course, if you're in states like Massachusetts or Washington that have, fairly low exemptions for state level taxes, those are places that wealth advisors are already, really leaning into planning as a core part of what they do. Not surprisingly, we over-index to those two states in terms of our customer base. So I think you're going to find more of the industry looks that way. I talked about consolidation in my opening comment as a big trend in the industry. I think you're going to see more bigger firms where you will have some dedicated resources, perhaps in-house, around advanced planning. You've got a number of formerly practicing attorneys who have gone in-house as wealth advisors. I think that's a trend that's going to continue. But ultimately, that expertise is going to be more valuable if it can be scaled using technology across more advisors and end clients. And that's where I think Luminary will be in the right place at the right time as that trend occurs. Similarly, with the great generational wealth transfer, which people talk a lot about, I'm less interested in the value of the wealth transferring. It's always been a big number, and asset inflation just makes it bigger today than it was before, and people have always passed on. But what we know is that the nature and the expectation of the next generation of wealth owners is going to be really different as they've grown up much more digitally native than their parents. And so the firms that are really providing tech forward experiences and are engaging their clients in a much more personal way. It's not just about, making money, more money. It's really, we used to like to say in my old firm, making money meaningful. Being able to do that at scale where it's personal, it's valuable, and it's, highly engaging and interactive from a tech perspective. That's what the industry is going to look like. And, again, I think we've put Luminary in place today, recognizing those trends and anticipating them. And I think, some of the folks that have been some of our early partners and customers, before I can even finish my vision statement for what the industry is, they're completing the sentences and, we're just looking for the things that make it happen.
Terrific. So let's wind up here. What is the best way for someone to find out about Luminary, and how do they get in touch with you?
Luminary is actually Luminary Platforms, and our URL where our website can be found is withluminary.com. So visiting our website will both further inform you around our product, how it works from a features and benefit perspective, but there's probably no less than 10 places on the website where you can request a demo. And so I think that's probably the best way to do it. In every one of those cases, we love learning more about the customers we serve and prospective customers we serve, and seeing if what we're doing, can be of service.
Terrific. I'll have that in the show notes. David, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Frazer. Appreciate the opportunity.